Good morning, everybody. I am Laura Gonzales-Murphy. I'm the New York State Director of the Office for New Americans, and I am also representing the New York Department of State on the Governor's Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. But most importantly, I'm a graduate of this wonderful institution as well, so it's pretty exciting to be here today. And for that purpose, I want to thank Gina Belinsky of the SUNY Center for International Development, the Albany Provost, Jim Steller, and of course David Wynn for SUNY CID as well, for inviting me to participate in this really interesting conference, analyzing possible areas of intersection between two very tragic issues long affecting not only the US, but the world today, human trafficking and violent extremism. And I find it quite poignant to be doing this conference or this workshop today here in Albany, considering that it's a time where Albany unfortunately is in the map, in the news, with an Nexum example of trafficking. So I keep thinking Nexum, is that the right name? I think of the purple pill, I'm sorry. It's like the commercial, so I'm like, is that how it really said Nexum? But moving forward. So this morning, I have the pleasure of moderating the panel that will help provide for all of us the foundation for today's discussion by presenting first an overview of the principles and action agenda taken by USAID, which is one of the leading actors in the countering of trafficking, followed by an analysis of what trafficking encompasses from an enforcement and criminal enterprise perspective. Regarding the first issue, we will have V. Lamb, I said it correctly? Oh, good, thank you. Democracy Fellow at USAID Human Rights Division. He joined USAID in 2012 and has provided technical support to missions across Africa, Asia, Europe, Eurasia, Latin America, and the Caribbean on the protection of human rights and strengthening civil society. V received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we were going to have his presentation, and I would like to share with you a couple of thoughts that I'd like you to think of as he makes his presentation based on David's questions. But take note of them, because we will discuss them at the end after both presentations. So first of all, I'd like you to keep in mind the following. What is the role of governance in countering human trafficking, and how can the programming and application of principles exemplified in the programs that V is going to share with you be of benefit to countering violent extremism? Also, when analyzing, we tend to focus on the similarities between areas. However, a good comparison and a good analysis of examples includes the differences. So as we learn about USAID's countering trafficking efforts, any differences that come to your mind may be helpful as you think of violent extremism. So please keep in mind those thoughts, and we will later use them for identifying action or responses. So without further ado, I'd like to have you come up and present. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and thank you to Gina and David for the invitation to participate in this great event. And definitely thank you to the Vice Provost for a great introduction. My name is V. Lam. I'm a Democracy Fellow, and I provide technical support to USAID over the last 5 years in the field of human rights. And one of the key sectors that I support is counter-trafficking in persons. And as we saw in the video, USAID partners with many of our colleagues in implementing programs to address trafficking in persons. Specifically, IOM in that video where we highlight many elements of trafficking, and which includes the force and deception, illegal debt, violence, and it also, through the images, if you caught that, was inclusive of men and boys, and sex trafficking is one element of the entertainment industry that where people are trapped into servitude. I won't repeat many of the high-level data that David had provided, but I also want to highlight the TVPA, the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000, that the key aspects of defining trafficking includes the action, which may include recruitment, harboring, or procurement of people through a means which includes force, fraud, or coercion for the intention of exploitation, which may be labor or sex trafficking. But it does not explicitly require the element of transportation. So David's highlight of the source, transit, and destination country is very helpful in terms of us following the flow of trafficking victims, but we also work on issues that may not be requiring transportation of victims. And some of those specific cases include child labor within the family, and it also includes hereditary slavery in some contexts. So we through the TVPA, we work more holistically and broadly on the issues of trafficking. Inclusive of the TVPA Act is that USAID is delegated a very small part of the work. Specifically, we focus on foreign assistance programming, and that is in coordination with the Department of State, which also implement program, and the Department of Labor, which focus primarily on child labor issues. So the context that I can give you today is very focused on what USA does and what my team as part of the human rights focuses on. In Executive Order 13627, the administration laid out very clear guidance for the role of US government in combating trafficking in persons, specifically that we work to eliminate trafficking issues within our procurement processes, but also that US government employees, subcontractors, subpartners are not allowed to procure sex acts abroad, even if it's legal in the local context. And also the Act establishes a hierarchy for guiding the anti-trafficking work in the US government. It starts with a cabinet level President's Initiative Task Force, which is then supported by a senior policy operating group at the working level to help coordinate efforts across agencies to combat trafficking in persons. And for USAID specifically, in 2012, we released a CTIP policy, counter-trafficking in persons policy, that outlined 5 principles that we use to guide our programming. The first one is integration. Trafficking is a multifaceted, complex issue, and we need to address it as such. Usually it includes marginalization, no access to livelihood, deficiencies in healthcare, education, protection of human rights, access to land rights, issues such as those, and there's no one single program that can holistically address all of those issues. So our goal is to coordinate efforts within USA and integrate counter-trafficking in person efforts across our portfolio. The second one is learning. And given all the challenges that David highlighted earlier, it's really difficult for us to identify and quantify the prevalence, identify the key populations, identify the root causes, so that we can appropriately design our approaches to address those issues. And of course, during the research discussion later today, we'll go into more depth on that. The third principle is institutional accountability. At USAID, we, as part of the interagency, we provide training to all our staffs, all our contractors on what TVPA and the President's executive order mandates us to do. And we also established a field guide and code of conduct for our own employees and our partners. We also established standard operating procedures for procurement contractors to have steps to guide them in their implementation of our program. The fourth principle is investment in critical challenge countries. For this, we envision that to maximize the impact of our efforts, we want to target regional and global countries that are deficient in CTIP efforts, but may have a multiplying effect within the region should they step up their efforts in counter-trafficking activities. And we hope that they can be a strong partner with us in our efforts to fight trafficking. And lastly, we hope to increase counter-trafficking efforts in conflict and crisis-affected areas. And we will touch on this a little bit during the violent extremism discussion later today. And as you can imagine, that would include regions where they are affected by conflicts such as Burma at this point, Yemen, but also natural disasters such as Nepal following the earthquakes, Haiti, hurricane. So those are our guiding principles. For USAID as compared to other USAID or USG agencies, we have the benefit of local knowledge. USAID has more than 80 missions globally, usually in conjunction with the local embassy, and we have foreign service officers and local staffs on the ground who regularly reach out to the community, work hand in hand with the community, work hand in hand with the governments. So we feel that they are the best to understand the context, to inform project design. So what we do is much of our resources are delegated to the missions, and they design programming in the field. From Washington, what we do is try to take a more regional and global view of the issue, try to identify trend, learn, doing the research, learn, find best practices, and provide technical support to the missions to facilitate their work. So we don't have a big budget from Washington to do programming. All of our efforts are implemented on the ground. So to give you one specific example, do we have a timer? I don't know.
You still have.
Okay. So I just want to use Cambodia as a specific example of how we implement the strategies for protection and prevention and prosecution against traffickers and protection of victims. In Cambodia, there were 3 phases of CTIP programming. The first one was a $4.5 million, 3 years program that really started by building the capacity of the local government. It engaged 200 different ministries, actors, and donors in the country to really sensitize them to the concept of trafficking, to establish indicators of trafficking, and to establish best practice or standards for provision of services to trafficking. So in addition to that, we also implemented awareness raising and education programs for the public on what is trafficking. That program was followed by a $5.5 million 4 years program in strengthening the civil society's capacity to provide services to trafficking victims, which includes building networks for the civil society so that they know how to refer victims to services, that we can provide legal assistance for redress for victims. And we also continue to promote public awareness programs in the country. And most recently, we launched a $9 million 5 years program in the country to start getting at the root causes of vulnerability to trafficking, which is to provide livelihood support in terms of providing job training, professionalism training, employment networking in the country, so that the vulnerable communities have better access to livelihood. We also look at interventions to increase productivity in agriculture for the rural communities. And we also look at promoting resilience in the communities by encouraging community saving schemes where the community can provide loans to each other rather than so that they can become more resistant to trafficking. One community savings program, which starts with a couple dollars of contribution from each member a year. The program has been implemented since 2005 and has since grown into $1 million enterprise, which I think is a very impressive feat given the local context. So with that, I will look forward to the discussion, and I'll be happy to answer any more questions on our program.